Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today, all the way from Australia, is Gladys Berejiklian, who is both a Member of Parliament and Minister of Transport for New South Wales in Australia. Gladys, thank you for giving us the time on CivilNet.
Thanks, Salpi. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful that you're here. You're here with your colleagues, other parliamentarians, not Armenian. And the purpose?
It was principally to run a delegation to Armenia to show our support for the Armenian cause, but also our support for Nagorno-Karabakh. And I'm very proud to say that in New South Wales we have two houses of parliament, and the upper house of parliament passed a motion in support of the right of self-determination of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. So my colleagues were very excited to come to see for themselves what Armenia is about, what Karabakh is about, and it was fantastic to have non-Armenians exhibit such a strong sentiment towards Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh.
You know, it's really interesting. All we're asking for is the right to self-determination, which is in all sorts of public international documents, but when you say in Nagorno-Karabakh next to that sentence, it becomes a problem. So bravo to all of you.
Oh, exactly, thank you very much. And also I think what really impressed our colleagues was the significance Karabakh has to the future of Armenia.
Absolutely.
And the need for peace and the need to be able to live in freedom, and that was really impressed upon them. I think they came not really knowing what to expect, and they've left with very strong feelings about wanting to do more, which is fantastic.
It's so unusual to hear a woman of your generation, never mind on the other side of the world, being politically active. Let's do a little bit of biography. You started out, you're Australia born.
I'm Australian born. I started out, my parents were very keen, as most parents of their generation were, to ensure that we were involved in Armenian community organisations. So from a very young age I was involved in anything to do with Armenian community organisations.
Including political?
Including political. Went to Saturday school where I learnt my Armenian, and then eventually became involved in the Armenian National Committee and did a lot of work with the ANC, and then started getting my own political identity and ran for Parliament and got elected. So then
that was how many years ago?
That was 10 years ago. So I made the transition then from not being involved so much in Armenian community organisations directly because I had a new responsibility, but now I'm able to help in different ways. Yeah.
Being in government, being in office, you were elected to Parliament, and you were in Parliament. You've now been in Parliament 10 years, but you're also Minister of Transport.
Yeah.
How does that work?
In our system, you can't be a minister or a nakharar unless you are a member of Parliament. And the concept behind that is that you need to be close to the people and represent your constituency. So I have a constituency which is called the electorate of Willoughby, and that got me elected to Parliament. And then when we formed government 2 years ago, when my party came to government after being in opposition for many years, the Premier or the Governor of the state then decides who his cabinet is, or his ministry, and he appointed me Minister for Transport. So
in a country that big, you're Minister of Transport.
Yes.
Well, that must be fun. Maybe we should bring you here.
Yeah, no, we have enormous challenges in Sydney in particular. We have a growing global city and our transport's not keeping up, so enormous challenges, and that takes up most of my time.
Let's talk a little bit more about this before we talk about your constituency. In Armenia, the concept of democratization is often exclusively defined by elections. We don't have normal democratic elections, and therefore we're still just barely on the road to democracy. In your case, your system has said that we already take normal elections for granted, and now we want even the governance part to be more democratic. So you as minister weren't just picked up off the street by the Premier. You have to have been elected by the people. That's the premise. So who are you accountable to? That
system's been in place since we started democracy in Australia. It comes from the Westminster system in Britain, and that's what we adopted. So, and a lot of our systems are halfway house between the US and Britain, so we'd like to think we've got the best of all worlds. The concept behind that is that I obviously need to report to the Premier as the leader of the government, but I'm accountable to the people through the Parliament as the minister. So if anything goes awry in my portfolio, or if there's any major issue that needs to be conveyed, we do that through the Parliament, and that's the concept behind having both an elected representative but also a Minister of the Crown, as we call it.
And your constituency is, I can't imagine, majority Armenian. That's
Not at all,
who elected
not at
you.
all. Unfortunately, my constituency used to have a number of Armenians many years ago, and the church and the Agump is in my electorate. But I probably wouldn't have more than 500 on the roll, on the electoral roll, and I have about 55,000 people who elect me. But mind you, having said that, even though Armenians don't have a large presence anymore in my community, on election day they're everywhere. And I couldn't have won my first election without the support of the Armenian community. I only won by 144 votes the first time. So the Armenian constituency did make a huge difference. It was a very small margin. Now I hold my seat by 85%, so it's fine because once you're established, it's easier to hold on. But my first election was a very difficult one, and I wouldn't have been able to do it was it not for the support of the Armenian community.
Australia is such a society made up of minorities, huh? So many ethnic groups. How many?
Too many to count. We say around 160 in New South Wales alone, but apart from Indigenous Australians who were there 40,000 years continuously, we would argue that everybody is a migrant. So even if you came on the first fleet, if you were on the British first fleet in 1788, when you talk about that versus 4,000 years of Armenian history, it's a very different concept. So we are a country of migrants. We're very proud of that. It's part of who we are in Australia, part of who we are in the state of New South Wales, which is the largest state.
So does getting a Berejiklian elected, is that a problem?
Initially it absolutely was. We couldn't even fit my surname on the poster. So, I had a lot of suggestions when people knew I was running for office. You should shorten your surname or you should change it. But I really wanted to keep it. It's part of who I am. And the benefit is I was named after my grandmother, and Gladys is a very old-fashioned but very uncommon name. So now everybody knows me as Gladys. So it's actually worked in my favour having a distinct Christian name. And the surname is just part of my identity. And now, radio presenters, media people can say my name without a problem. Initially, that wasn't the case. 10 years ago when I was elected, it was a tongue twister for them, and now it's just normal.
How do you reconcile your two kinds of responsibilities, being visible, accessible, available to your constituency, and being on the road to I don't know where in New South Wales to fix transport systems?
Great question. The way that I manage myself is I have a dedicated time where I spend every week in my electorate office in Willoughby, and any constituent who requests a meeting with me I grant. So if you want to ring me up and talk to me about any issue, you have that opportunity. If you want to write to me and ask me to respond or do something on your behalf, first and foremost, I regard myself as a member of parliament, because if you don't have that contact with the people, you don't get re-elected, you can't do anything else. And I do find it a responsibility that I am their voice, and I do have an inherent responsibility to make sure that I reflect their aspirations, their values. And every constituency is different, and there are sometimes issues in parliament which we have to vote according to our conscience. And I have strong views on things, but I always also take into account what the people I represent want me to do, because I think that's an important part of the process.
Is it unfair to ask you to talk about being in opposition? I say unfair because in your case, you're in a system that works. There are institutions that are balanced, checking each other, maintaining accountability. In our parliament, our minority parties are really at a disadvantage in terms of the rules, the regulations, the procedures. It's really quite a majoritarianist structure. Is it unfair to ask you how, what you might say to those minority members of parliament?
To be fair, I think any government of the day has a huge advantage over opposition parties, and I was in opposition for 8 years, and part of that time was as a shadow minister, because the system we have in Australia is that for every minister there's a person on the opposition who speaks on those policy issues. So I did that for about 6 years of the 8 years that I was in opposition, and I did feel quite disadvantaged. I felt a lot of the things I wanted to raise were suppressed. I think that's part of every political system, that the oppositions automatically are at a disadvantage. But I never felt that I couldn't express myself or raise issues, and that's part of the process. And every day that Parliament sits, the opposition is allowed to ask us questions in Parliament. We call it question time. So the opposition gets up and asks any minister any question, and we are obliged to get up and respond to their question. So that part of what we do every single day, and that's open to the public and the media, and that's where the media focuses all their attention on, and the opposition leader gets the first question. So it's always a contentious part of the day, but one that reflects the kind of democracy we have in terms of being fearless about what you can and can't say. But I think, no matter where you are, oppositions will struggle because, there are certain tactics we can use. We are the majority numbers, so every time there's a vote, we will always win. In opposition, we couldn't do that. No matter what we raised, we always lost. So it is a struggle, but the key tenet for us is, and I think which is important everywhere, is just to feel fearless in what you say and what you do, and then let others commentate on whether you're right or wrong. And that's how our system works. We have a very active media who will commentate and decide who said what, and then determine what people think. But these days, because of the internet and the online presence, so much is now left up to people. I mean, you don't have media telling you what to think, or government or oppositions. It's really the way you interpret messages you're receiving, and I think that's really changing the dynamics in Australia and I believe everywhere in terms of how people are responding to the system.
The Armenian community in Australia is no longer that first-generation immigrant community. It's your generation and down. In that sense, has the nature of their political engagement changed, or is it still a 1-2 issue community like so many others?
Oh, I'd like to think the level of engagement has changed, but we are, the principal issues, 1 or 2 issues, obviously dominate the system, but we're getting more involved at local government level. So we have a few few councillors elected at local government level, a few mayors and councillors of Armenian heritage, and ordinarily when you get elected to a position of responsibility like that or like mine, you have an obligation first and foremost to represent the people who elected you, and so you don't, obviously you have a much broader suite of issues you need to talk about and to act upon, and I think that helps convey to the community our need to be broad-based, to the Armenian community, our need to respond to issues happening in our own local communities, not just overseas and elsewhere. And so I think it's finding the right balance. But as a community, we do feel very strongly about supporting Armenia and Karabakh, feel very strongly about recognition of the Armenian genocide and the right to self-determination for Nagorno-Karabakh. So these are all things that we feel very strongly about, but I'd like to think we are also having a broader base, a better self-awareness of our place in New South Wales and our place in the world and how we can make a difference.
Վերջին անգամ երբ ես Հայաստան եղել։
Հայաստան եկա 8-9 տարի առաջ, 2004 էր եւ ընտրված էի միայն 1 տարի, so 1 տարվա խորհրդարանի կամ պատգամավոր էի երբ եկա հոս, եւ շատ փոխված է երկերը 8-9 տարվա մեջ իսկապես։ Շատ հառաչացած է, շինությունը դարբեր է, օրինակ երբ եկա հրաբարակը դակավին չէր նորոգված, so շատ փոխված տեսա, շատ հառաչ դիմացած տեսա երկերը, մեծ ուրախություն պատճառեց ինձ։
Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you for speaking with us. Gladys Berejiklian is a member of the New South Wales Parliament as well as Minister of Transport, Australian, and a representative of a new political generation. And thank you for following us on CivilNet.